Hello everyone, I'm Gemma Beall. Welcome to Beyond Second Cognition. I want to share my thoughts and insights that I had today about two words. The words are vulnerable and trust. So this presentation is called Vulnerability and Trust. In honor of this presentation, I'm going to share this with you all uncut. I thought about doing it unscripted and uncut, but I really don't want to torture you all, so I'll be reading my script, and if I fuck up, oh well, shit happens. Vulnerable is defined as susceptible to physical or emotional attack or harm. Trust is defined as a firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of someone or something, or the state of being responsible for something or someone. The reason I'm presenting both these words to you because when you put them together, they really go hand in hand, especially where self-trust is concerned. If you embrace vulnerable as a value or an experience, then every second of every day that one is involved in first cognition habits, they are vulnerable, even when they're alone. They are not vulnerable to physical attack or harm, but they are vulnerable to emotional attack or harm by the mere voice that condemns them in their own mind. We give others power over us when we cater to the emotions of vulnerability. If you don't think vulnerability is an emotion, I ask you to consider this. What physical feeling do you feel within your form and your mind when you feel vulnerable? Could it be fear? Can you separate the fear from vulnerability? I couldn't, so maybe vulnerability isn't an emotion, but it is definitely a filter that fear places on you. For right now, I'm going to focus on external vulnerability. Every time we step foot outside of our door, whether it is literal or metaphorical, like when we interact with others in an online environment, we are subjected to the opinions and criticisms of others. But does that make us vulnerable? In your mind, you might feel that it does. But in my mind, from second cognition, I know that I am never... I don't need to say that. Okay. I know that I am never vulnerable, especially from a cognitive sense, because I am not emotionally or physically reactive to those emotions or to those opinions or criticisms from others. Was I always this way? Absolutely not. It took a lot of grit and hard internal work to get past the internal feeling of vulnerability of other people's opinions and criticisms. There is nothing any one of us can do that isn't going to draw an opinion or a criticism from others external to our world. When we walk outside, someone's going to have an opinion about how we look or how we are dressed or what we look like, no matter how fantastic we look or feel. The other people may not verbalize their opinions to us, but it is going to happen. Operating in first cognition with the ego at the helm, we are so vulnerable that not receiving compliments is a throat punch to the self-esteem of that little ego tyrant. Have you ever thought about the vulnerability of not receiving a compliment? If you look at yourself and look at others around you, how many times have you gotten all dolled up, ladies or gentlemen, and found yourself feeling down because nobody noticed and or said anything? Especially the person you got all dolled up for. How many women are emotionally crushed when their husbands or boyfriends doesn't notice that they got a new haircut? We are only vulnerable when we externalize or internalize a food source for our emotional well-being. The hapim and its habits are the only ones that need to be fed. The soika draws strength from knowing, and no matter what the situation is, the soika is never vulnerable. As we encroach on our soika paths, we find this internal vulnerability in the spooky recesses of our psyche, and even when we feel soika strong, it can rear its head as we begin digging at the bottom of the proverbial barrel. It's very difficult to have trust, especially self-trust, when your fake reality world is crashing all around you. If I've said this once, I've said it 1,000 times, and I've heard others say it as many times. I'm so confused. I don't know who or what I can trust anymore. If you have said this, or if you feel this right now, I have one thing to say to you. You only need to trust one person, and that person is you. Not the Hapim habit infected body mind you, but the Soika you. Endel and I have said in all our books and videos not to take our word for any of this. Trust yourself in this process because you are genuinely and honestly the only person you need to trust. I'm going to ask you some questions. I want you to grab a pen and paper and write down these questions. I don't want you to think about the answer. I want you to clear your mind, and the first thing that pops into your mind, this is the only way to get an honest answer. Are you ready? If not, pause the video, please. Do you trust yourself? Do you trust yourself? Do you trust yourself? Do you trust yourself? How many of you answered no to any of these questions? Raise your hand. Just kidding. I know I can't see your hands, but you can. We've been conditioned from early childhood to trust our authorities. How many of you were taught as a child to trust yourself? Do you kapoople, soika feel that self-trust is innate? What I feel is that self-trust is innate to soika, but not to the physical form. But that's a topic for another time. In the first cognition world, it is said, and I used to believe this is true, and still do to a certain extent when it is dealing with others, but not when it comes to dealing with yourself. Trust is the hardest thing to build, yet the easiest to break. When we go back and look at the definition of trust again, the firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of someone or something, or the state of being responsible for someone or something. Self-trust isn't a belief, it's a knowing. Are you reliable to yourself? Are you truthful to yourself? Do you have your own ability? Are you strong? Are you self-responsible? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then there is no reason whatsoever that you shouldn't have trust in yourself. If you do not have self-trust, then shift your focus from your Hapim ingrained habit of not trusting itself and put your focus on your Soika and trust yourself. You have to remember, none of us Soikas chose our filters. We never chose not to trust ourselves, and we weren't taught self-trust as a children. We weren't taught by words nor by observation of the world around us. What we were taught was to criticize ourselves, to doubt ourselves, to second guess our intuition, and to trust our authorities, regardless if they had earned our trust or not. I know how it feels to be confused. I know how hard it is to believe something so fiercely that you will defend it to the death. I know what it feels like to criticize and berate myself for not being perfect, and I know what it feels like to have my entire world ripped out from underneath my feet and feel that it was all my fault, when it was all my fault. I also know what it feels like to not be confused in my mind or in my Soika. I know what it feels like to believe nothing and be open to what my Soika shows me and to trust that even when I fuck up. I also know what it's like to put myself out there to the world. I also know what it's like to put myself out there for the world to see and to be criticized and not feel vulnerable. I mean, look, how many mistakes have I made thus far? I know some people's probably calling me a dumbass, and I'll call myself that jokingly, but I don't feel vulnerable for doing that, or for you calling me a dumbass for it. I know what it's like to make mistakes and have it pointed out to me and own it and not feel vulnerable. I now know what it's like to put my bloopers out there for you to see, and I don't feel vulnerable one bit. I am just like you. I live, I feel, I fuck up, I fall, I get up, I move on, and I don't feel vulnerable or distrust myself for doing so. I've said it before, mistakes are my greatest growing tool, so why would I distrust myself for making mistakes? When you own the fact that you are going to fuck up, and that's okay, You learn from it and move on. You will develop that self-trust, that Soika trust that will smooth out the bumpy road of your Soika path. Are you ready for smooth roads? I want to thank everyone for listening and subscribing. Until next time, I'm Gemma Beall. Stay the course and don't give up on yourself, and throw a little bit of self-trust in there while you're at it.